Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to It's All About the Benjamins Financial Literacy Series. I am your New York City real estate agent, Jamela Swift, and I'm with Keller Williams NYC. Today's episode is called Paid in Full: How to Build Financial Intimacy with Your Mate and, most of all, with yourself. My guest for today is Ms. Jacquette Timmons, the author of Financial Intimacy: How to Create a healthy relationship with your money and your mate. And she's also a financial coach. Welcome, Jacquette. How are you?
Thank you so much, Jamela. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. Now, in your book, let me ask you, what inspired you to write your book?
So it was a couple of things that actually inspired me to write my book. I'm a curious person, and I think I'm always on the lookout for patterns in some way, shape, or another. And Financial Intimacy, the book, came out of a recognition of a pattern that actually started on a sad note. And that is a really dear friend of mine. He was like the older brother that I never had. He passed away suddenly from an aneurysm, a brain aneurysm, and he was married to my college roommate. And I got to see up close and personal how what you don't know about someone's finances can interrupt your grieving process. And luckily, thankfully, he was an up and up guy. So it wasn't like, secret accounts, but it's like if nothing is in joint and you don't have your name on anything, it's a little more difficult to just get some of the things that you need to get done after someone dies than if you have a will and all that kind of stuff in place. So that was one issue. A month after that, another friend, her father died, and that is when her mother discovered that they were $500,000 in debt, and that wasn't their mortgage. So yes, exactly that look that you have on your face.
No.
And then, what'd you say?
I said, oh no.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no, I think I think an expletive goes before that. Oh no. And then the month after that, I was working with a coaching client, and on paper, she's the epitome of financial success. Wharton MBA, working on Wall Street, high six-figure salary. So for her, day to day, month to month, that wasn't the issue. But she and her boyfriend, who I am happy to say they're married now and with child, but she and her boyfriend back then fought all the time around money. And from our coaching, what emerged was part of that friction was because she didn't want to play out the patterns that she saw in her parents' marriage around money, and what she saw also beginning to unfold in her brother's marriage around money. So these three events happened literally February, March, April. Had there been a year between them, I may not have noticed anything. I may not have had the question that I ultimately had, which was, these are all college educated professional women, some with double degrees. What is it that they're not talking about during pillow talk time when it comes to money that puts them in a situation where they don't know what's going on in their household when it comes to money? They don't know what their other, what their spouse is doing, or how they're thinking or how they're feeling. And so I just became curious around, why is that? And to satisfy that curiosity, I created a workshop called Women, Money, and Romance. And it became really evident that no matter how often I ran that workshop, no matter how often I experimented with the length or the format, it was just never enough. And so that was the birth of the idea of, well, maybe there's a book. And so that's how Financial Intimacy: How to Create a Healthy Relationship with Your Money and Your Mate came about.
Wow. There definitely were a lot of patterns there. And wow, I'm just thinking about the mother who found out that she was left with a $500,000 debt. Whew, okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, like I said, an expletive.
yeah, yes. So in your book, you stated, although many women have become financially and academically successful, they fail when it comes to managing money's emotional impact on our relationship. How so?
So let me just pause and take a step back and just say that in my book, I don a social critic's hat, if you will, and I look at how have things evolved over the last 40 years. Now we're having this, you and I are having this conversation in 2020, but I'm having this conversation with myself back in like 2005, 2006. So the question was, how have things changed economically, politically, socially, and in terms of family dynamics over the last 40 years that has changed? How do we show up in relationships in general? And how do we show up in relationships in the context of money specifically? And, I don't know about, what you were told when you were growing up when it comes to money and relationships. But I know my mother was always like, make sure you have your little stash. Right? We're all told something. And I think that for a lot of people, some version of that was the extent of the conversation around love and money. And we did not develop the tools, nor did we perhaps see it actually in practice, conversations around money. And so I think in terms of your question with regards to why is it that we're not good at it? It's because we didn't see it practiced and we didn't practice it ourselves. And we didn't know that we needed to practice it ourselves. And the it that I'm talking about is having a conversation around money and not just having those conversations be around when you're in a crisis or, you're mad or there's a transaction that needs to be had. Like it's almost as if you only have, crisis-oriented kinds of conversations around money. So there's not a proactive approach to it.
I'm thinking, I'm listening to you and I'm chuckling to myself because your mom taught you to make sure that you have your stash. My mom taught me, make sure you have your own money so you don't need no man. And that's exactly how she was saying, so you don't need no man. But the thing is, I always listened to her and I took that into account. But in a lot of ways, I think it has detrimentally impacted my relationships with men. In terms of yes, it's good to be independent, but you have to still be interdependent. And you also have to allow yourself to be vulnerable to connect with people. And when you have that wall up, like, I don't need you, it really does. I'm mature enough now to see that in a lot of ways, it's also held me back,
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell people all the time that, we might be having a conversation with money at the center, but we're not just having a conversation around money. From my perspective, money is the communication tool. And you said a really key word there when you said vulnerable. I think it is the tool, the pathway by which we can express our areas of vulnerability, that we can create the space for somebody else to express their vulnerability. Because with money, so much of our identity is wrapped up into it. And so therefore, so is guilt and shame and fear and all the emotions that you can think about. And when we are in relationship with someone else, it's almost like bringing together three different Venn diagrams, right? There's you, there's the person, and then there's money. And so what happens where those Venn diagrams overlap is you're bringing your relationship with money to the table, and he or she is bringing their relationship with money to the table. And it is that messy middle that we, fight up against, if you will. But that's also where I think if we give ourselves the permission to dive deep into it, that's the space where you can actually deepen your connection and deepen your intimacy by way of being much more vulnerable, honest, and all that other good stuff.
Exactly. There's a lot to think about with that. Now, what is financial intimacy with money, and what would you say is a good, healthy relationship that one could have with money?
So, intimacy in general is just a matter of closeness, right? And so if you think about your close friendships or the family members that you're really are close to, you may or may not use the word intimate But one thing that you would probably say is a common thread between all of them, going back to using the term vulnerable, is you feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you can, express what's going on with you in that moment, and that person not have judgment about you. And while, yes, it may seem really odd to describe money in that way, because money doesn't necessarily talk back to you, but I do indeed think that money is giving you feedback. And it's giving you feedback around your beliefs, your behavior, your expectations, your fears, your goals, all of that stuff. And so when I say financial intimacy, I'm saying, how self-aware are you about your relationship with money? And so the key thing there is I need to make sure that someone already, I shouldn't say I need to make sure. My book is not for the person who is skeptical and doesn't think that you have a relationship with money, because it's not my job to convince you of that. So that's the first thing. Like, you have to embrace this idea that just like you have a relationship with other people and even animals in your life, right, that you have this relationship with money. Right. And so if you want to, get more from it, that means you have to be engaged with it, just like you have to be engaged with any other kind of relationship, and you have to do the work to nurture it. So when it comes to money, it's respecting it, it's nurturing it, it's, tracking it so that you know what's going on with it. It is recognizing that money needs you to give it direction. So the clearer you are in the direction that you give it, the more it will give back to you what it is that you want from it. And to me, those are the same dynamics when it comes to any other kind of relationship where closeness is important to you and intimacy is important to you. You've got to be clear about what you want, and sometimes communicating that is awkward, and you just got to get over it, and you just got to do it. And I think the same is true when it comes to money.
I'm thinking of my relationship with money and how much it's evolved as I've blossomed into the woman that I am today. When I was young and dumb and in my 20s, my relationship with money was a hot mess. I don't know how many times I had overdrafts on my bank account. It was just ridiculous, and it was just messy. And, but I still had a sense of pride in that I never went to my parents for money, unless the house was burning down. It had to be dire emergency before I would call up mom and dad and say, you know what, I really need help. I always, fostered that, okay, I can do this, I can figure it out. But then as I've realized I don't like drama, I started to become more organized, and you can see it more in my home. You can see it in my bank accounts. Everything is neat. I don't overdraft anymore, thank goodness, and I see how that's reflected in the relationship that I have with myself, just having healthy boundaries with people. So yeah, it's showing up with my money too.
Totally. So there are two things I want to just piggyback on. You said that what you see happening in other areas of your life, you also see then unfolding with your relationship with money. I remind people all the time, especially when I do workshops, that, just like when you look in a mirror and a mirror is reflecting back to you, right, what you have on. So today I have on a red blouse and you have on like a rusty tan, I think. If we stand in front of a mirror tomorrow, it's gonna reflect back whatever we're wearing tomorrow and whatever we wore yesterday. So the reflection is the same, but what's being reflected back changes. And so for me, your wallet is that reflective device. And so every single time you go into your wallet, whether it's to pull out cash, get your debit card, get your credit card, or you are online doing a transaction, banking or purchase, what's being reflected back to you is not just the act of what it is that you are doing, but it's reflecting back to, well, what are my beliefs in this moment? What's my value in this moment? What are my expectations? What are the choices that I am perhaps doing today as a result of the choices that I've made in the past? And I don't like the consequences, so I'm going to make sure not to do that again today. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is, you said the word evolved and how your relationship with money has evolved. And that is perfect, because like, again, any relationship that is of of importance to you and significance to you is going to change, is going to evolve. And so if your relationship with money today is the same as it was 5 years ago, that means one of two things. Either you haven't grown or you haven't applied the lessons that you were taught in those 5 years. And hopefully 5 years into the future, the relationship that you have with money will be different than the one that you have today. And for me, getting that across to people is such a critical part of my work. Like getting folks to recognize that your relationship with money is not static, A, and then B, it's going to be one of the longest relationships that you have. Like even if you're married to your boo for 60, 70 years, your relationship with money will still be longer than that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, you know, one of the things I've been practicing recently, my respect for money and also the boundaries that I've established, I got tired of paying late fees, you know, on the little frivolous bills, like, you know, my cable vision bill. Oh, you know, don't worry about that. But then I started looking at the extra $10 fees that they were charging me. And I said, oh, absolutely not. So now
Right.
I know I have to pay cable vision on the 15th of each month, and it's in my calendar. So
Yes.
I know that's coming. Also with my credit card fee, that's due on the 20th. I put it in my calendar, make sure, because those fees add up, especially with
They
credit
sure do.
cards.
They sure do. I tell my clients, especially if they use Google Calendar, I'm like, set up a financial calendar and have it be colored green and have on your calendar the dates that your bills are due and the amount, if it's a static amount, and then if it's variable, just put V so that you're never surprised.
Right, right. Now, what about the person who has, you know, the hot mess of a relationship with money that I once had, and they meet someone and they're able to establish a marriage or just even a commitment together, and their funds are commingled. And now they decide, okay, I really want to get this together. Now, how do they go through the process of evolving with money and bringing their mate along with them?
A couple of things. I think just like in general, no one shows up to a relationship perfect. And so that extends to your money. And so I think that, if someone shows up and they are in a lot of debt, or they're just a hot mess, as you described earlier in terms of the language that you use, and you're not, I think it's just a matter of how open the two of you are to having conversations around it, and then doing the work that's going to be required to ensure that if you aren't on the same page, you are at least on the same chapter. And let me give you an example from a client where I think this is a really great illustration. And it's also a really great illustration of the conversations we don't have with the other person, but we're having with ourselves. So this was a couple that lived together for 4 years before they got married. And while they lived together, they split everything 50-50. They get married. A year into, the newlywed phase, they come knocking on my door, figuratively, and they're like, we need help. And what we began to unpack from our work together was that once they were married, she had a different expectation than he did. Her expectation was the reason we split everything 50-50 and we kept all of our accounts separate was because we weren't married. But once we got married, well, of course, we're going to combine everything. And of course, we're going to do things now proportionately. Why did she have that expectation? Because that is what she saw growing up. Her father was an entrepreneur. Her mother was a stay-at-home mom, but her mother handled all of the finances. So that was the picture that she saw, and everything was open and everything was commingled. And so she just assumed, well, when we get married, we're going to do this. He, on the other hand, his parents were divorced. His mother was a professional. He never saw them, manage money together. He never saw them talking about money. And so he was like, well, why would we think anything's going to change just because we got married? So they're both having this separate conversation in their own head around what's going to happen after they get married, but they had not had it together. And so it was through our work that we got to the crux of, oh, this is what the issue is. You had different expectations, and now how do we come to a solution? So going back to that Venn diagram again, for those two people that come together and maybe one doesn't have their stuff together and the other does, it's a matter of having the conversation so that you can figure out what is the relationship that the two of you want to create and cultivate. You know that you are already bringing in your own, and that's been influenced by your family dynamics, your past experiences, etc. But then what's the relationship that you want to create? So it's really an opportunity to ask that question. Well, what do we want to do? And how do we want to do it? And how do we make this, just as our relationship is unique from, you know, the relationships of our closest friends, how do we make our money relationship unique as well, unique to us as well?
So now, I mean, it's great that they both agreed to come and talk to you, and they both saw that they had a problem and they needed to get a third party involved. But let's say if one is reluctant and says, you know what, I'm good. So what if my bank account is in disarray? But the other is at the point where, you know, they realize, okay, this is an issue. It's kind of like where I've seen a lot of couples, one person wants to go to a therapist, whereas the other one is, I'm good. You know, you go talk to the therapist. What would you suggest to that couple? What would they do?
I think that's when you've got to get really honest with yourself and entertain the idea that money's not the issue. Money is the vehicle by which you are discovering what the issue is, but it's not fundamentally the issue. And so you have to be willing to unpack that. And that's not an easy process. And you might not like where that process takes you or the decision that it, you know, prompts you to make in the end. But that's when you really, really have to understand that that's the issue isn't money. It's money is just the way of getting you to pay attention, because that's oftentimes the easiest thing to get you to pay attention to some deeper issues. But that's when you really have to be willing to explore those deeper issues.
Now, do couples that are dating, do they come to you prior to getting married? And what is the best way for them to talk about money without making one partner feel embarrassed or ashamed about their financial history?
So the couples that have come to me before marriage were engaged. So they weren't just dating, they were engaged. And so they knew that that was the next step for them. In terms of, in general, how do you, you know, have this conversation? I always say to people that there is absolutely no question that is off the table. However, the caveat being, you cannot ask a question that you are not also willing to answer. So ask whatever you want, but you got to be willing to put your answer out there. And in fact, one of my suggestions is to lead with that. Lead with, you know, a scenario and how you responded or how you are responding or how you plan to respond, and then ask the other person to perhaps do the same. And let it be okay if when you do the ask, if they're not ready to have that conversation right then, let it be okay that they're not ready to have that conversation right then. But then make sure that you come back to it. Make sure you do have a plan to address it at some point in time. So how do you have the conversation? Step into it, but make sure that whatever you're stepping into, you are just as curious as you are about their answer to the question. You are as open to sharing your answer to it as well, and perhaps leading with that first to just get the ball rolling.
So now we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and I've been seeing a lot of articles about domestic violence being on the rise right now. And, you know, we've been trained to automatically think that domestic violence is physical and also verbal and mental. But I do know, you know, I've read cases where financial abuse is very real. You know, can we talk about that a bit?
Sure. But what's your question?
Well, I've seen, okay, well, what does one do if they have a mate who does not contribute to the household? Like they're hoarding their cash, or, you know, they're using their money as a weapon against their partner.
So I think there are a couple of things. So normally I am in the camp of, I'm normally in the camp that there should be as much financial transparency as possible.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular instance, if you feel as though you are being financially abused, that probably would be a good time for you to actually have that secret account that no one knows about, so that you can then prepare yourself for, if either that person leaves or if you decide to leave, that doesn't make you in an even more financially vulnerable situation. So that's one. I think the other thing, though, is when you discover, because I've worked with clients who have discovered some financial infidelities. And what I will say is that typically they don't survive it. And they don't survive it because it's a huge betrayal in terms of trust and security and safety. And it's a matter then of what are you going to do to rebuild your life on the other side of that. So here's an example, and this is taken from the book. One of the people that I profile, and for a number of people, we obviously changed their names and all that other kind of stuff and some identifiable information. But anyway, in her instance, she goes to a co-op board meeting, and the co-op board is looking at her like, why are you here? And she's like, what do you mean, why am I here?
Oh, no.
Well, her husband sold the apartment and she didn't know. Now, it was an apartment that he owned before they got married, and they lived in there for a bit of time, but they had it and they were renting it out and they had moved elsewhere, but he never told her. And when she confronted him, he was like, well, why do I need to tell you? Like, that was my property before. Like, I don't owe you an answer. So again, that's an example of, this is not about money. This is about something else. And so unfortunately, they did end up divorcing. I know someone else on the flip side who, also in the book, who was with someone who was really adamant against debt. He was just not an advocate of it at all. And he kept saying to her, look, before we get married, I need to know what's going on. Excuse me. And she wasn't forthright with him. And turns out she had $70,000 in debt. And needless to say, that didn't happen. So I think, there can sometimes be a fine line between financial infidelity and financial abuse. When I hear financial infidelity, I hear, that someone has a secret account or money elsewhere that you don't know about. When I hear financial abuse, I hear that someone is taking all of the money that comes into the household and they are controlling how much of that you have access to and what you can do with it. Either situation is not healthy, but either situation also says that there is something else unhealthy about your relationship that you need to address in addition to the financial piece. So if you want to work on the relationship, you got to get some help. If you don't want to work on the relationship, you've got to figure out your exit plan, and you've got to figure out then how do you financially protect yourself in the process of implementing that exit plan.
Yes, because regarding your clients who, the woman who went to the co-op board meeting, one, that's embarrassing, to find out everyone knew except for you, and you're sitting there like, okay, can I see the minutes? And they're like, what are you doing here? I mean, and then also that's blatant disrespect for her husband, for him to think that it was, none of her business. I mean, yes, he owns the property, but still, I mean, you just out of a courtesy, just let someone know. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. I mean, trust is very big. And once you break it, it's so hard to build it back up.
Trust and power I mean, you think of all of the words that go with money, right? So there's trust, there's power, there's independence, there's interdependence, like you mentioned, there's secrecy, there's vulnerability. I mean, all of that, money can put a spotlight on and expose. To what degree do you have trust in your relationship? To what degree do you understand the power dynamics in the relationship? And, we often equate the power with the person who earns the most. That may or may not be the case, but there is an element of power always when it comes to money.
Right. I'm just thinking about couples who establish a prenuptial agreement.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hot topic, especially now that women are making a lot of money, and a lot of times women, and I've seen this not only with white women, but I see it with multiculturals, where women are the breadwinners now, and they're not thinking about the importance of a prenuptial agreement. And then you end up like a Mary J. Blige, who ends up divorced and has to give his, entire family money. And, it's a totally different ball game now. So that's a lot to think about too.
Yeah. It's not the top thing that we want to talk about, right, but it's an important thing to talk about. And I think that, I don't think anybody, and maybe this is the romantic in me, but I don't think anybody ever gets married with the intent of getting a divorce. I just don't think that. And let me live in my bubble. But having said that, I do think that, there are certain instances where it is definitely very prudent to remember that at the end of the day, a marriage is a contract. And perhaps the most loving thing to do is to actually have this prenup so that, as a contingency goes, if something does go awry, you know how you're going to handle it, so that in those moments when you are deeply hurt and deeply angry, you're not like holding on to like, no, this is mine. when you're in the more loving part, you're like open. You're like, okay.
Take it all. Yeah.
Oh my God. So I just think that, depending upon your professional situation, even if you don't think you need it now, you might need it in the future. And so err on the side of just getting the darn thing. And even if you're not going to get married and you're going to do like a domestic partnership agreement, which you can do in some states, I would still say get some sort of whatever the prenuptial version of that would be, to get that in writing as well.
Mm-hmm. I like you, I am a romantic. I love, but I also have seen so many he done me wrong stories. I don't know, maybe it's because I've watched Lifetime in my life and everything.
You gotta stay away from Lifetime and Hallmark.
And not even just that, just growing up listening to my mother talk to her girlfriends on the phone, and it's just these tragic stories. But I've grown to think, I've never been married, but I do have this belief that marriage is also a business, and that you have to do your due diligence with your partner, and that of course you want to give people a chance, but the way businesses, before they merge together, they vet that other company to see if this is the right fit, and I know with myself, I have to, because I'm in a place where I think I'm very financially comfortable. I own real estate. It's just too risky for me to just, merge my assets and not really look at what this person is bringing to the table. And maybe that has held me back in a sense, but it's just about being prudent, as you said,
Yeah, and I think a couple of things. I don't subscribe any one way of handling finances. So I don't say that everything has to be joint. I don't say that every situation needs to be yours, mine, and ours. You got to figure out what works best for you and your relationship. Having said that, though, I do think that if you do go the yours, mine, and ours route, that there has to be an agreement that statements are open for everybody's eyes. Mm-hmm. So you might, from a mechanical standpoint, a tactical standpoint, keep everything separate. And in one instance, that actually saved a relationship because one person was a saver and the other was a spender. And so that they would not fight over that. It was like, look, you spend whatever you want to spend out of your account. But we're going to protect what we have over here. Right. But the agreement was everything is for everybody's eyes. And I think that that's an important practice to have as a part of your money dates. And I really do believe that couples need to have money dates. I think that whether you do it once a week or once a month, sitting down, 30 minutes, grab a glass of wine if you drink or whatever it is your favorite beverage, and just talk about not just the numbers, but talk about your goals and the progress that you're making. So that money is not this thing, as I mentioned before, money is not just this thing that's on the back burner where you're only talking about it when there's a crisis to be addressed or a major transaction to be had or to be made. This makes it so that talking about money becomes as natural a part of your relationship and the conversations that you normally have as anything else is of importance to you in your relationship.
Now, what is your take on the differences between being rich versus being wealthy?
Well, first of all, rich is all about income. And so you can be a millionaire in terms of your income. But if you spend $999,000 of it, well, you're still operating at a profit because you didn't spend it all, but it's all income. And wealth is all about your assets, right? Wealth is all about what do you own and do you own more than what you owe? And so, I did some financial workshops for the NBA as a part of their Rookies in Transition program. And so it took a lot of guts on my part, I think, to tell these young men who, have $1 million contracts, you're not rich, dude. I mean, I'm sorry, you're not wealthy. You're rich, but you're not wealthy. And helping them to see the difference between the two. And I think that for some people, they get that confused. And if they have their lifestyle in such a way that they're living a lifestyle as though they were wealthy, and really they're only rich. And so making sure that people really understand that rich is all about income, wealth is all about assets, and making sure that you own more than what you owe. And I think when it comes to relationships, one of the key elements is making sure that you are, again, if not on the same page, at least in the same chapter around understanding those differences and what those differences mean in the context of how do you work, how do you live, how do you socialize, and what's your game plan for getting from point A to point B?
Now, going back to the workshops that you used to conduct, have you considered bringing them back? Because, I mean, it seems like they're really needed right now. Women, money, and romance, right? That's what they were called.
Yeah. I haven't. Maybe now that you've planted the seed. I guess that will be my answer. Maybe now that you've planted this seed, but I haven't thought about that. In more recent years, a lot of my workshops have been inside law firms, doing sessions for partners and associates, and then corporations and at conferences. And lately I've been doing a lot of work with entrepreneurs and small business owners around their pricing and getting them to understand, just like with love and money, getting them to understand that when it comes to pricing, it's a three-pronged approach, right? It's part financial, it's part emotional, and it's part personal. And recognizing that pricing can be that lever that ensures that your business's success translates into having a positive impact on your personal financial health too, which is not always the case, because some people can think that, oh, my business is successful, it's profitable, it's cash flow positive. and then realize, but wait a second, I personally am broke. So I want to actually make sure that there's always some synergy there. So that's been my focus of more recent years, but who knows? Maybe now would be a good time to, resurface those other workshops.
I mean, I think you definitely will be in demand, especially now because there's so many businesses that their paperwork is really unorganized, and that is why they've been overlooked for the Paycheck Protection Program. I've been sitting in on calls with our Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, and a lot of people are really, really struggling and suffering right now. And they're looking, constantly checking their emails to see, okay, am I going to get this money? So really consider bringing that back,
Well, from your lips to God's ears, as they say. We'll see.
Thank you so much, Jacquette. I really appreciate your time. This was such a fruitful conversation, and it's given me a lot to think about,
Oh, yeah. What's one thing has it caused you to think about?
Well, just in terms of my relationship with money, like I said, I feel like I'm in a good place right now, but yeah, it's just a lot to digest, and you've planted some seeds for me. And I'm sure the people who are watching this video, I could see, I'm sure the light bulb has gone on in their heads as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And if I can just say as a parting word, whatever someone else's relationship with money is, whether you describe it as good or bad, especially if you describe it as bad, don't make them feel bad for it. Mm-hmm. Just like you wouldn't want somebody to make you feel bad for your relationship with money, because we're all a work in progress. And as long as someone is willing and open to do the work, if you both want to, be on the same page, be in the same chapter, if you're both willing to do the work, you can do it and you can have success. And I'm happy to say that I can say that because I've seen it. And it's a beautiful thing to see two people who may have had, experienced a lot of hurt in their relationship, with money being the vehicle to expose it. Then all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, over some time, get back to that loving space with one another. So yeah, I just want to make sure that people hear that.
Well, I will say, while you were saying that, I mean, I could see for myself, we discussed trust, and we discussed vulnerability and the importance of having that in order to connect with another person. Because there was a time in my life where I always saw it as, oh, I have to protect mine because I don't want you to run away, and going back to what my mother taught me, make sure you have yours so you don't need right. that person. But when you think about it, we do all need each other. I mean, what is, being in this world with an I am legend existence where you're the only person, I need you, you need me. We all need each other, but we've been taught as a society, especially in Western culture, that we don't need each other. When in reality, I mean, we really do, right? Like right now, I haven't hugged someone in 8 weeks. I need a hug.
I totally know what you mean.
Oh my God.
Totally know. Yeah, this moment in time, I think if people, haven't embraced the fact that we are all connected in some way, shape, or form or fashion, I'm not quite sure what will get you to pay attention to that if this hasn't caused you to notice it.
Right. Now, if someone watching this video wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can do so?
A couple of ways. So I love me some Instagram, so you can follow me on Instagram. Just put my name in the search box, Jacquette Timmons, and I will come up. But you can also go to my website, jacquettetimmons.com. And what I would recommend is doing the financial wheel exercise, which is a free exercise. And especially in the context of relationships, I would suggest that you do it and then have your mate do it, and then come together and talk about your different answers to the questions. It's a simple, quote unquote, exercise, but it is profound in terms of the ahas that people experience from the questions that I ask. So those would be the two ways that I would say to get in touch. And then if you want to actually, you know, talk about working together, you can do that directly from the website. Just schedule a call.
And, you know, I will include your contact info in the description box below, as this is posted on my YouTube channel.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm really excited.
I really appreciate you doing this. This was great.
Thank you. Paid in full. Thank you so much for having me.
I'll be speaking to you soon.
Okay, perfect. Have a great day. Bye.